clearly how, across the board, this government fails to take responsibility for their failures. When things go wrong, it's always somebody else who is responsible. It's always somebody else's fault. We could talk, for example, about inflation, about grocery prices, about how everything is more expensive under this government, especially so many household essentials that people rely on to feed their families. And so their response to it is not to acknowledge at all the role that their policies have played in this. Not to acknowledge the fact that the reason we have rampant inflation in this country is because the government has spent massively beyond their means and that has driven up the cost of goods. It's the inflation tax that was a policy choice of this government. That's what's driving up prices. But now they want to present themselves as there to solve a problem that they themselves have created with absolutely no recognition of the role that they have played fundamentally in causing that problem. We can talk about the housing challenges. The Parliament Secretary just spoke about how, the government spent millions here and thousands over here, and we're doing all these things for housing. Well, how's it going? Mr. Speaker, how's it going? What are the results? We're building fewer homes today than our country did in the 1970s. We are way behind in terms of meeting these needs, and this is because of policies that have been implemented by this government. Again, and we had an incident discussed in question period today, where unbelievably, this government allowed a Nazi to be in the gallery during a speech given by the President of Ukraine. And the government's response to these events, we're not responsible. We found our fall guy. We had nothing to do with it. When in reality we know that it is the responsibility of the government to vet those that are going to be in the gallery for an important event like that. They are responsible for the vetting. They know this is how the process works, and they're denying responsibility. So whether it is in this incredibly embarrassing and wrong incident that happened at the end of last week, or whether it's in the approach of this government to policy in general, we see a complete unwillingness by this government to take responsibility. Now, I asked a question earlier on the issue of the Trudeau Foundation. And this is another instance where we see the government's failure to take responsibility. And the question I asked at the time was about the fact that the government claims the Prime Minister has had no ongoing involvement in the Trudeau Foundation, no interaction with the Trudeau Foundation, and yet a meeting takes place in the Prime Minister's office between deputy ministers and the leadership of the Trudeau Foundation. It boggles the mind that the Prime Minister would try to pass off the fact that on one hand he would say no involvement whatsoever in this foundation that received very problematic donations, and on the other hand this meeting would take place in the Prime Minister's own office. And the response we got at the time from the government House Leader to these questions about how this happened is, well, it was just a building. You know, it just happened to be the Prime Minister's office was the most convenient location to have it. In fact, I think we had a witness at the Public Accounts Committee from formerly of the Trudeau Foundation who said the Prime Minister's office was just a convenient downtown location. So anyone in Ottawa who wants to hold a birthday party or something, they need to know the Prime Minister's office is available. It's just a convenient downtown location. That's ridiculous. It's not a convenient downtown location that just anyone can book. It is a relatively small building that is the Prime Minister's office. It's called the Prime Minister's office. When will these Liberals stop passing off the blame and start taking responsibility for their numerous failures?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think the member has some challenge in terms of recognizing what real responsibility is all about, quite frankly. Let's give a few examples. What I find is very lacking in the member's comments is the issue of facts. You know, if you listen to the Conservatives, you would think that the Prime Minister of Canada is the one responsible for inflation around the world. You know, you would think so. You know, as back in the days when they were posing these questions, Canada's inflation rate was less than the United States. It was less than most European countries. The G20 might even been, if not the lowest, very close to the lowest, Mr. Speaker. They completely dunked their head in the sand And they say, well, but here's in Canada, even though it's the lowest, it's the Prime Minister's fault that we have inflation. It's kind of like, wake up, look at the environment around us, and realize the facts of reality. Now, it doesn't mean that as a government we shouldn't do anything because of our inflation rate and the impact it's having on Canadians. As a government, we actually did take actions. We recognize the reality of the hurt that Canadians were having. That's why we brought in grocery rebates, Mr. Speaker, affected somewhere around 11 million Canadians to help deal with inflation. The member makes reference to the issue of housing and the speech I had just given. You know, what the member doesn't tell you is that compare our years in government to the years of Stephen Harper, and you will find that the Conservatives fail in every way, Mr. Speaker, in every way. In generations, we have now a government that does provide, but it doesn't mean that we don't recognize the hardships that are out there and the reality in terms of what's taking place. And that's why we brought in legislation to ensure that there's going to be more housing built or homes built, Mr. Speaker. That's why in 2022, I believe it was 2022, when we brought in a budget enhancement for housing co-ops, Mr. Speaker. Not to mention the hundreds of millions of dollars that are allocated towards low-income, nonprofit housing, or the rapid housing initiatives. You see, the Conservatives are very, very selective with the facts. And they try to twist and turn and bend in order to be negative and then to shine that or say that negativity is happening because of the Prime Minister. The last example that the member gave was in regards to the Trudeau Foundation. I've answered questions based on that issue, Mr. Speaker, in my capacity as Parliamentary Secretary. It's been all completely cleared, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister had nothing to do with the foundation for many, many years. But the Conservatives try to paint this, this hook or this thing here, that point goes there, this point goes here. Oh my God, it's corruption. Garbage, Mr. Speaker. Just like it's garbage in terms of the personal character assassination that the member just put across the floor when he talked about inflation and groceries and housing. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives just don't know what direction they're going.
The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, the member said that in my comments I'm throwing all these things out there, really trying to connect the dots to establish that there's corruption in this government. It's actually not very difficult to establish that there's corruption in this government. I think the youngest of my children could connect the dots that are available. The fact is, all one has to do is consult with the various reports, not just the report, but the various reports prepared by the ethics commissioners that in fact demonstrate the corruption of this government. You don't have to rely on political parties. You can go to the various nonpartisan officers of Parliament. The member said other countries experience inflation. I'll say this, other countries that have pursued inflationary policies have also experienced inflation, just as this government, in pursuing inflationary policies, has caused inflation. And he talked about Stephen Harper on housing. Well, I think it's just objectively demonstrable in the numbers that there has been a close to 100% increase in 6 years from 2015 to 2021 after Stephen Harper took office. So whatever this government is doing, it's not working. There's been a massive increase in housing costs that you just can't blame on exogenous factors. It's not the war in Ukraine that's causing the price of housing to go up. When will this government take responsibility for their failures?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think that at the end of the day, I would rather listen to what the Ethics Commissioner has to say than members of the Conservative Party, because you have to believe. There's a number of members in the House that believe in this whole tin hat theory, Mr. Speaker, and conspiracies galore, where ultimately they think that they put things together and it just doesn't make sense. It really doesn't. And at the end of the day, they get upset if I don't agree with them that there's corruption. Well, I don't see in any of the topics that the member has actually raised this evening that there's any form of corruption. What I do see is a lot of fishing rods going into the water, a lot of stargazing and wishing, Mr. Speaker, and connections that are just not there. As they focus their attention on the Prime Minister personally in character assassination, this Prime Minister and this government, my Liberal colleagues, will continue to focus on the needs of Canadians.